proposals from Craig Allen regarding the city's electrical distribution system. I am listed on the agenda item, but Mr. Allen is the one that is going to present this. Ask him to come to the podium, and thank you very much, ladies. Appreciate it.
I look forward to working with you.
Yes, thanks. He will make his presentation at the end. I will ask the council members if they have any questions for Mr. Allen, and then I will ask the others in the room if they would have any questions for Mr. Allen or for the council, possibly. We're going to try to keep this orderly. I know a lot of people are here concerning this item, and I do want to, I think the council wants to hear, I know I want to hear from the citizens, and we'll just move forward with this and eager to hear what Mr. Allen has to say.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming, council, and also those that I was able to talk to personally. I really appreciate that. Before I get started, there's a lot of figures here, and there's absolutely no way that we can dig into all the figures and come to a consensus tonight. So what I'd like to do before we really get into details is just kind of summarize some of the research we've done. And so that's going to be basically that second page of that package where, I don't know if it's in color for you or not, but on mine it's got a big blue box around it. It should look like this, and it says, what would happen if the city sold the distribution system? So basically what this is we took the light department, the revenue and the expenses, and we took out all the transfers that were going between departments, and we came up with the $833,720 of actual revenue. Now that revenue is per the budget. All the figures that I'm presenting are from the budget. The actual figures that may have occurred in FYE 2014 are more than likely slightly different, but I'm using budget figures here. I do have two reports that I got from Karen via FOI to be able to know that the budget was very similar to the actual consumption, and those reports agreed with that. So I'm pretty confident that Mr. Keiko did a pretty decent job in putting the budget together last year. It's reasonably close to actually what happened as far as the electrical business went. So we have $833,000 that we have revenue if we remove the transfers. And basically those columns or those numbers that follow that include savings that would be garnered to the city if we sold the distribution center. And just quickly, there are $101,000 in franchise fees, and really, that's likely to be much higher. That report, this figure comes off the budget. In 2011, a study was done on June 6th. A request for purchase was done, and it was determined that that would probably be closer to $320,000 by Larry Wise, the city manager at that time. So then we have $239,000 for a 2010 bond series plus half the interest, and I'll explain this in a second, and then the 2013 bond and half the interest. Basically, we have two bonds that total, did total around $3.5 million. There's less money there now. Half that is being paid by the INS through property taxes. This year, 50% of it. The other half is coming through the light department. And it's not in the figures that are associated directly with the light department. It's actually been categorized separately. And I do have that here. And if you've got a copy of your budget, you'll see that it's under certificate of obligation, so it's a separate entity, which means that if we sold the light department, we would not have those bonds that would be required to be paid out of the light department. They still have to be paid, but we're going to take them out here, and I'll explain a little bit more later. If we take all that out, we're left with $238,000 worth of revenue. So what we've done is we've gone from a very large figure to a relatively small figure, and I know you guys are going to have questions. I hope you have questions. But $238,000 is what really is left when you take that light department's revenue and expenses and you throw away all the money movements. So we don't really have near as much money as we originally thought. Then on top of that, what we have is a premium that the schools are paying, the city itself is paying to pump water. If the city pays 9 cents a kilowatt, which according to the August financial statement, we paid 0.093 cents a kilowatt. A person in Santa Ana can get a lower rate on a retail schedule than we're getting in an industrial setup. So we're paying a premium to pump water to light our buildings or to run the city. And that also has to be taken into account. I didn't put it into the bottom line because there's no way to know exactly what that is. In addition to that, we have the actual shop, the electrical shop that's consuming energy. And when you take those out, you can see that we're probably less than $200,000 in actual revenue that we're generating through the sale of electricity. And this did not include depreciation for the new year. So what we have is, there's a lot of arguments in depreciation, but what we do have to realize is that over a period of time, the T&D system is deteriorating. And you do have to replace poles, and you do have to replace transformers, and you have to replace them at dollars that are more expensive later than they are now. So unless you're putting aside money for those expenditures, you don't have an accurate picture. So now, what does it cost for the city to receive the $238,000? What we did is we looked at several different options, and I did not pick the lowest one. There are lower options that are available in San Antonio and areas around here, and the average is closer to around 10 cents. And so we picked 10 cents. That would be through Green Mountain in this example. And last year, across the entire city, all businesses, industrial, and residential paid 13.136. Most residents paid 14 cents, as Mr. Keiko has. We've got a 7-cent electric rate and a 7-cent power cost recovery until this new year. So what we have is that as of last year, we were paying a premium of basically 3.5 cents. 3.5 cents spread over 37 million kilowatt hours is $1.3 million. So it took $1.3 million to get the city $238,000. That doesn't work. There's a problem. When the citizens are spending $1.3 million to get the city $238,000, there's got to be a better way. So what we're looking at is ways to get the city money. $238,000 could still be a hole if we look at it from that angle, without taking a great deal of money from the citizens. And I want to put this in perspective so that you understand just how significant this is. Basically, if you were to give a charity $10 based on this ratio, that charity would get $1.80. The rest would be consumed by administration, handling, waste. That's what we've got here. We've got a system that is consuming those dollars without actually getting to its intended purpose of funding the city. We want the city funded. It just isn't an efficient method.
So where's that money going?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask that. So that is a wonderful question. And okay, so last year, per the budget, $676,000 was transferred from the light department to the general fund. Mr. Cato, you agree with that, right? This year, budgeted $1.1 million. So essentially, we're taking money from the light department and we're giving it to the general fund. That's a very common occurrence. However, it's a lot more complicated than that. We also transferred money from the light department to the airport, $25,000. We have two internal franchise, an internal franchise fee and a general services fee of $104,000. That's basically money that is going into the general fund through a mechanism that isn't exactly called transfer to general. And my understanding, and Mr. Cato can certainly correct me, is that this is there as a holder to show that if the system were owned by a third party, that would be a reasonable amount that could be collected for franchise fees. So we're basically charging ourselves a franchise fee, and it is getting over to the general fund. And then we have, last year, $298,846 was in depreciation. This year there's none. That money that was taken for depreciation actually went to the general fund. It just didn't get called a transfer to general fund. So what we really transferred last year was $1.28 million. And this year, 1.3. Any questions so far? So, if we did transfer this money, where did it go? All right. Now, first off, we have to clarify just a little bit. Some of the money that was made in the light department wasn't actually made in the light department. The light department did not make any income. The bonds did. The bonds would still be there, and so there's some income there. We have miscellaneous income, interest income, AR admin fees, and we have a government capital corp outlay, I would imagine. And then we have something that I have not figured out yet. But $223,000 comes in from the garbage fund to the light department so we can transfer it to the general fund. So we're moving a whole lot of money around, but we obviously, the garbage fund is not the light department, and so it doesn't belong there. And so what we're going to do is, the city would still get the garbage fund money if the light department did exist. It just doesn't have to go through the light department. So when we take that out, last year we have $977,000 going, and this year we have $1.2 million going into the general fund. So we have a lot of money coming from the light department going into the general fund. Everybody is pretty well agrees that there is money coming from the light department into the general fund. So what would happen if it was sold? And that's what this blue box is all about. And I know these figures are not something that we want to go on to very long, but they're pretty necessary. Okay, again, if we sold the light department, we would receive franchise fees. That's those next items. We would receive if we sold the system, and we did not have a substantial buyout, which I'll talk about in a second, we could net somewhere around $5.5 million based on the June 6, 2011 study. If that's the case, we're going to be sitting with $5.5 million more than we had prior to the sale. If that money were invested at 2.25%, which was reasonable until a couple days ago, it would net $125,000 a year. Then we also have $1,000 worth of equipment and other assets that could be sold that weren't a part of the initial bid, about $1 million. Again, if you invest that, you're looking at about $15,000. Then I talked to
What's the
Bill
other
Jones.
inventory and equipment?
Huh?
What is that other inventory and equipment?
Well, for instance, the purchaser, AUP Texas North, they're not interested in our trucks. They're not interested in some of the equipment we have. They're interested in the poles and the transformer, the distribution system. They've got their own equipment. So it would be sold in two different packages, basically.
The poles and the transformers?
No. The trucks and shop equipment that we have, that we use to maintain our system, is not something that AEP Texas North or the co-op is likely to purchase. They have their own equipment.
So we would sell that and get $1 million for it?
That is what Larry Wise reported on June 6, 2011. I have that
Is
stuff.
their stuff worth $1 million now? Not close?
Oh, I think that's a very good point.
I was just asking, I mean, he knows, he's the guy that operates.
Right. I think that's a very good point. So what that means is that our system has deteriorated in a real-world situation. I think there's one copy there. There's several different pieces there. Mayor Pro Tem Payne, what that means is that every year our system is worth less than it was before unless we continue to maintain it. And that is part of the real-world cost in staying in this business. We have a depreciating asset that, if it's not maintained, is not going to be worth tomorrow what it is worth today. Sure. All right. So, if we take those and add the ad valorem tax, the property tax, on $5 million that somebody else is going to own, it would be taxed just like any other personal property. I confirmed this with Bill Jones, and that would net around $18,568 last year, and based on the new rate, $28,521. So we're recovering. Last year, $388,000. This year, $419,000. That leaves us with a shortfall of $588,000 last year, $798,000 this year. Now we have some other indirect costs. The real-world depreciation, as you have just pointed out, is there. Those assets are depreciating. And not only are we required to keep them up to make sure the city doesn't get into a situation where it's negligent, there's just going to be poles breaking and transformers going out that we have to replace. And eventually, if a larger capital outlay isn't in place, it will probably cause another bond, which has occurred previously in the past, that our system gets to a point where we have to put some serious money into it. And of course, that's why we have bonds. If we have to keep floating bonds, we're not really making money. What we're doing is transferring debt to the citizens to keep the utilities system. All right, so then moving on, we have a real-world depreciation of the $1 million. If it's not worth $1 million now, it's already lost some of it. And we have the premium paid by the city to pump the water. And then we have, and this figure on the far right is conjecture to a point based on the budget this year and Mr. Cato's statement that there would be sufficient revenue from the light department to do basically anything we needed to get done. It would seem likely that we're going to have an increase in our capital reserves. If we have an increase in our capital reserves, what essentially we've done is taken it from the savings account of citizens and put it in the savings account of the city. It didn't go to any work. It just went from one place to the other, and it's not doing anything. So how much that figure is, I have no idea. We won't know until the budget's done, but we know it's probably likely to occur. What that does is bring us down to the bottom line again. Where did the money go? We have $226,000 left over, which is pretty much the same figure coming from the other direction. And this year, $233,000. And again, in my figure in red, shows that if we look at it from this angle, where did the money go? Well, it took not $5, but $9.46 from each citizen, or for every $9.46 a citizen gave the city through the electrical bill, the city only profited by $1. Again, that's a horrific return. That's where we're at. All right, I'd like to just take a moment to just show you another thing that should be bothersome. And there's two reports here, two consumption reports. One of them is 2010, and one of them is 2014. Okay, and basically, our city is decreasing in electrical consumption, which I think everybody here knows. There's less industrial demand, and there's a small change in the residential demand, which is not a good thing. I do a lot of analysis on trying to determine the health of particular areas. And instead of using government GDP figures, I use electrical analysis because they can't be changed, they can't be fudged. The amount of electrical consumption is what it is. You fudge a GDP figure, but you don't fudge electrical consumption. So what we have here is a city that in 3 years has lost in people consuming electricity. Now it's possible that there's a whole lot of LED lights out there, but more than likely we're seeing a decrease in both business and residential use. Now, I'd like to go to that, if you don't mind, that final piece of paper that shows the June 2011 study. Okay, and if you will, just go to the back page. I didn't do this, and I'm not positive that this came from Larry Wise, but we believe this was presented by Larry Wise.
What does this look
What
like?
does it look like?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's this.
Oh, the public hearing
Yeah.
on the RFP?
Yeah. Sorry, somehow I just figured you know exactly where I'm thinking.
Well, we had some things at the back, past the RFP. All right. Now, first off, at my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, back in 2010, AEP approached the city. It was October 2010 that the meeting was, so it was sometime just prior to that. That we were given an opportunity to receive $375,000 in exchange. Would be that we take on the risk of congestion fees. And so the city elected to do that. And shortly thereafter, through changes in ERCOT's zoning, or possibly an arguable point, but the short end of it is that the $375,000 was consumed in a hurry
and we were paying congestion fees. During those meetings, the council at that time was looking at the merits of this system. One of the things they did was to do an RFP, with a request for purchase. That took several months, and it wasn't brought back to the point of a public hearing until June of 2011. At that time, there were two bids on the system. And AEP Texas North, which is a subsidiary of AEP, and the co-op here. AEP Texas North is basically a company that owns transmission lines around the state of Texas and possibly other places through other subsidiaries, sister companies. But AEP Texas North is in the business of poles and wires. They make their money by charging basically 3.5 cents a kilowatt for the electricity that goes over the wires. They don't actually produce the electricity. They are, as I said, a subsidiary of AEP. They are, I guess for all technical purposes, a sister company of AEP, who we are currently purchasing our power from. At that time, this budget analysis was put together, and they determined that there was a great deal of shortfall, and that's that last page, $894,000. And so, at that point, it was felt that there's just no way to stomach that kind of loss. All right, in this package, the estimate for electricity for that year was going to be 44 million kilowatts of energy. However, per the actual consumption report for 2010, it was only 39 million. So what we're talking about is more than 5 million kilowatts of energy that wasn't actually ever built. So right off the bat, the revenue side of this original report is flawed. It doesn't have anywhere near that much revenue. Number two, it doesn't take into any account items that I've mentioned, including depreciation, cost to pump our own water, refine the sewage, the cost to the tax entities that are, or for instance, the school that's supported by tax dollars. None of these things came into this proposal or this study, and depreciation's not in there. And so what we have here is the same thing that we've been led to believe over and over and over, that there's a lot of money being made, but in reality, it's not there. It's around 200,000. It's not anywhere near the million. $200,000 is something that we can make up. All right, the last page, I highlighted those figures, and I'm almost done. The $5.5 million, my understanding, was a bid from one of those companies, and it did not include a buyout. In other words, we were not going to have a termination cost to get out of the contract. So, based on Larry Wise's figures, and I'm sure he was very capable of putting these figures together, he was showing that there was no termination cost. They were going to liquidate the bonds, which may or may not be possible, because a portion of them may not be callable. They may not all. Mr. Cato, you would know, I don't know. Are the bonds, 2010 series and 2013 series bonds callable?
No, they would go into an escrow account, and then they would be paid before
Right.
time. But they're not callable.
Yeah, so that's what my note there is. I didn't feel they were callable. So we really wouldn't be able to liquidate the debt. So what would be happening, so that we understand this then, is we have about $4 million in the bank right now. It's a little bit over that. We'd be putting $5.5 million more in. Over $9 million would be sitting in the bank. Now, some of that, as Mr. Cato just implied, is that we would have to put that aside. We're trying to relieve give some relief to the businesses and the residences of Coleman that really don't have a mechanism to make up the difference.
I would like to point out one of the elements that we haven't discussed is going to require us to go into executive session before you make that kind of a motion, because it is a legal matter. And so before you make that motion, we need to go into executive session. Yes.
We didn't go into executive session, did
Well,
we? We have it. When we voted.
well, if you, I can't tell you, because it's part of the contract, can't tell you how to do it. All we can say with regard to the contract is that in 2019, we'll have a different provider, or we'll have a different amount if we stay with the same provider. And that in 2015, congestion fees will come back. Those are the only two elements of the contract that I can reveal, or that any of us can reveal. The item that I'm about to reveal is an item that is in the contract, and I cannot discuss it with you out here in public.
And we don't have executive session on our agenda.
Well, you do have executive session on every agenda. You have the opportunity to go into executive session to discuss any matters with regard to any of the items on the above agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
Restoration of the 14-cent rate would require you to go into executive session.
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't go into executive session to put it back, and to cover
Ma'am, I
everything.
can't discuss that with you, I'm sorry, because it's relative to the contract.
What about the second motion?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Okay, in regards to the contract, I was under the assumption whenever most city employees go under contract with some private entity, the contract in question is to be made public knowledge to the citizens of that town.
Yes, ma'am. And I have thought that. I was told by Brian Tierney, who is the second in command of AEP, not AEP-EP, but AEP in Columbus, Ohio, that when I asked him, I said, who required that this be a confidential contract? And he said, well, it was probably about a 50-50 deal. The city wanted it and the AEP wanted it.
But the laws in Texas states that any public contract negotiated by a town is to be made public knowledge to the citizens of that town.
Yes, ma'am.
That is a state law. It cannot be superseded by any contract or any subsidies of that contract because it is a law.
Yes, ma'am, and people have been fighting that for the last several years. And that is also something that has come up with some Austin offices of the fact that that is a confidential contract and is possibly not.
We can't afford more than we fight it.
We've already paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawyer fees to fight this.
Ms. Rockefeller, would you speak to that?
Yeah, I know there are exceptions to that rule, but I did not come prepared tonight to tell you what they are. I mean, that issue did not come up, so I'm not going to be able to speak very, intelligently on that at this point. So, but there are certain exceptions, public entities actually. So the whole point behind it, where there are exceptions, is really for public interest, where you want to, there are certain protections that private entities want in their business affairs. And in order to be able to contract with them in certain situations, you can agree to have certain things in a contract to be confidential for the benefit of the public, is the argument. Now, exactly what those parameters are, I didn't come, so.
Evelyn?
I didn't bring it with me, but I saw it in the PUC. Of course, I've told everybody that ever questions about any of this. The PUC has nothing to do with this because we're in MOU. But they do have interesting language, Ms. Rocco may know about it, that's in there about MOU, that they are expected to give their customers the same information that if they acknowledge that it's the city council that is in charge of this of the electricity service. But they do say, in one of their paragraphs, they do say that the PUC expects that the city council and whatever contracts, are entered into will give the citizens the same information as if they were deregulated. And I don't see that happening here. You know how many times I've asked for you. So, I mean, I know that they don't give it to you, and they have this legal language and blah, 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 and what am I going to do, hire lawyers? So, it seems like it's a brick wall. But, I mean, the PUC attempts to say that just because you're an MOU doesn't excuse you from giving the citizens the same information they would have on their bill.
It is protected by law, and it is protected through the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General will not allow us to release the information.
Oh, I know that. That's what I
And,
thought.
It is protected by law, and there are trade secrets.
It's protected by their interpretation of the law. And I agree, there's no way around it. I agree.
There are trade secrets in the contract. They're protected.
We tried, so we know what you're talking about.
Ms. Marshall?
I better not say anything, thank
So, why don't we take our problem to the media?
Well,
Let's play this out in the media.
there it is.
There it is.
Certainly, you're right to do that, and as far as this all came up in June when a social media campaign was started, and that got us some information, and like I said a while ago, that at least got AEP to the table to talk about a few things, and for us to figure out, for us to release the fact that in the 12 contract, we put off the congestion fees, but they will start in January of 15, and the fact that the contract in the 12 contract stated that there would be an extension of another year. Everybody thought it was ending in 17, but it's not. So that's, it's certainly your right to do what you want to do. That's why, in speaking of the things, the citizens, and allowing you to talk tonight is what I think the council needs to know. And do y'all have any further questions, or?
Well, we currently, according to the city manager and the city attorney, if we're gonna make any motions, we need to go to executive session.
You can actually make the second motion without the executive session, if I understand that correctly. Could go.
You'll have to remind me which is which.
Okay, sure. The second motion on your package there is to, it's on that cover page in your package.
Yeah, respectfully submitted,
Yes.
down at the bottom, 1 and 2.
Yeah, so the second motion is basically to get information. Let's get an appraisal. Let's find out what our capital outlays are going to be. Let's get an audit or an analysis of our P&L so that we can have some information. I believe this is the opportune time to go ahead and do an RFP, put out a request and see what kind of bids we get. That's not going to cost anything. All you have to do is say, give us a bid. And so that doesn't cost you anything to do that. It doesn't seem like there's any good reason not to at least do that. And so let's get some information. I think we can determine the capital outlays internally. There's no audit cost there. I believe that David Harrison could take a look at our situation and come up with a general estimate that yes, we're going to have to do this come 5 years from now. So some of it can be done internally. The bid request is free. And get an appraisal, I believe that would be relatively reasonable. The audit, depending on how deep you want to go, to satisfy yourselves as to how much money we're making, that is really to allow you to feel comfortable with some of the figures I'm presenting so that you realize that truly there's not $1.1 million being made.
Mayor, I'd like to table Mr. Allen's request to reinstate the reduction of the power recovery fee to 7 cents until our next business meeting.
A motion from Mayor Pro Tem Payne that we table the action concerning the power cost recovery fee. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Excuse me. I have a second from Councilman Hayden that we table this item. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries that we table the item concerning the power cost, the reduction of the power cost recovery fee. Is there any other motion?
I'll make a motion to authorize the city manager to research the cost of an audit from at least 2 firms of the economic impact to the city should the city sell the electrical system.
Motion from Councilman Jameson that we authorize the city manager to research the cost of an audit of the economic impact should the city decide to sell the system. Further discussion on this? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't have a second.
Second.
I have a motion. Second. I have a second. Mr. Jameson made the motion. The second from Councilman Hayden that we authorize the city manager to research the economic, the cost of an audit for the economic impact should the system be sold. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries that we authorize the city manager to research the cost of this audit. Mr. Allen, we thank you for your presentation.
Thank you all.
And
Just let me know if I can be of any assistance, provide any substantiation on those figures. I'll be more than happy to.
okay,
And I'd love to continue working with each of you on this issue. Thank you.
thank you. Appreciate the citizens giving their input tonight. Feel that we can move forward with this. We can help the citizens at some point to be able to afford the electricity. This is not something that this council put in place, although I do not fault the ones who did put it in place in '07 because it was a very difficult decision then, and you do things on things that you make decisions on things that you feel will happen in the future, and when those things do not happen, it is very difficult to overcome them.